Hello, Exiles. This is Ryan from Behind Eyes Gaming, and welcome to another Path of Exile video. In today's video, I'm going to go over probably the most frequently asked question that I get in regards to the Frost Blades Trickster. But this information will also be relevant to anybody who wants to know about the mechanics of Trinity or uses any cold skill that uses Heatshiver with Trinity alongside of it. The question I get asked a lot is, why is my Trinity not proccing on bosses? And why am I not able to freeze bosses? And how am I able to proc Trinity when I'm not doing any lightning damage? So I'm going to go over all of that information and tell you how to make sure that you can freeze bosses and get that Trinity running. Because without Trinity, if you're running Trinity in your 6th link and you have Heatshiver and you're attacking a boss and that Trinity is not proccing, that means you're not freezing, which means you're missing the 100% of cold damage as extra fire damage against frozen enemies. So that is very, very important to note. So not only are you losing the 30% more damage multiplier and the 17% or 16 if you have a 20/20 percent elemental resistance penetration, you're also missing the 100% of cold as extra fire. So you're actually losing something like 71% of your damage, which is obviously going to be a huge deal when you're fighting a boss. So let's look over Trinity for a second. So the way Trinity works is whenever you hit a enemy with a skill, you will gain resonance based on the highest elemental damage type that you cause. You'll gain resonance of the other two types. So for instance, if I were to do just cold damage, which I can demonstrate here, I'll just go into the Blood Aqueduct to show this. Normally with Heatshiver on, will be freezing and therefore doing fire damage. But if I were to take Heatshiver off, if I go ahead and find something to attack here, you'll see that I am only gaining lightning and fire resonance, not cold, because I'm doing almost entirely cold damage. But when I put this back on, I go ahead and hit things. Actually, I'm one-shotting these things, everything, so that might not matter. Yeah, I'm not actually, you have to actually have something occasionally survive your hit. There you go. Something survived more than one hit. So that made my ice or my cold resonance go up because of Heatshiver, because Heatshiver is providing fire damage. So because one type of damage makes two other kinds of resonance go up, you only need to do 2 types of damage in equal amounts. So I don't need to do any lightning damage really in order to or at all. I do have lightning damage on my claws at the moment, but I could have 0 lightning damage on my build and proc Trinity very easily. So that is that explained. As far as what to do with freezes and bosses, what you can do, I've pulled up Cirrus right here in PoEDB. So you can actually check on PoEDB. They have all of the data for the enemies. And let's say you want to fight Cirrus, but you're not proccing Trinity. You can look at the ailment threshold here. And I guess before I explain this fully, there's 4 different factors that really kind of dictate whether or not you freeze. There's crit chance, because chance to freeze does not matter. The only chance to freeze we have on this build is from flash freeze, but that does not matter at all, because critical hits will always freeze if you're doing enough damage to do so. So critical hits will proc the freeze every single time. So we don't need any freeze chance at all. I could get rid of this if I wanted, but I need it for the cold mastery. So that is the first thing, is critical strike chance. Next thing we need is high enough damage. Basically, the way that freeze works is you have to do 5% of the enemies as a baseline. If you have exactly 100% freeze duration with no changes, you have to do 5% of an enemy's maximum life in a single hit, which is 1/20th, in order to freeze them. And that will freeze them for, I believe, it's either 0.6 or 0.3 seconds. I don't remember exactly which. But for every 1% of damage you do, I think it is 0.06 second freeze. Okay, so yeah, it must be a 0.3 second freeze. Yep, that's right. So yeah, for every percent you do 0.06 second freeze, and you get, if you hit a 0.3 second freeze, it'll actually freeze. Anything below that number, it'll basically be thrown out. It doesn't count because, freezes below that are basically trivial and shaken off and just don't matter, or for whatever mechanical reason. But that is the case. Now, we can actually influence this. We can make it a lot easier to freeze. Now, with this build in particular, we're running Yoke of Suffering, which is actually a detriment. It reduces duration of ailments on enemies. Ailments include, you can hold Alt and look at this, and it'll give you the information. Ailments are bleeding, ignited, scorched, chilled, frozen. Frozen's the important one here. Brittle, shocked, sapped, and poisoned. Now, effect of cold ailments, such as this 30% here, does not affect freeze at all. It does affect chill, and it's important to have for chill because we also get 30%. We can chill up to 30%, and we'll get 30% of cold damage as extra fire as well. That's important, but the effect of cold ailments does not affect freeze at all. What does affect freeze is duration of elemental ailments on enemies, or duration of ailments on enemies, or freeze duration. Those are all functionally the same thing when it comes to freeze. So, for instance, if I take a look at a pair of gloves that I recommend for early game, Southbound. Southbound has 100% increased freeze duration on enemies. That means if you had these on and you were hitting for cold damage, and let's say you didn't have Yoke and you didn't have the Cold Mastery, you just had your baseline freeze, instead of requiring to do 5% of the enemy's health, you would now be required to do 2.5%, because it would basically multiply your freeze duration. It would double your freeze duration. So instead of having 0.06 second freezes, you would now have 0.12 second freezes, and it would be much easier to hit that 0.3 second threshold in order to actually get a freeze that works, basically. So that is how that works. So you would want to scale this. So this is basically a multiplier with your damage in order to ensure you freeze. You can get it from a variety of sources. For instance, there is a shield that I used in the budget build called Leper's Alm, which has 40% increased duration of ailments on enemies. Of course, there's Southbound. I believe there's the Shaper Ring as well. I'm not sure if I have it or not, but I can check here. I think it, oh, this is Mark of the Elder. I believe Mark of the Shaper also has, or one of those other, yeah, it might be Mark of the Shaper, but there's a ring with duration of elemental ailments as well. So yeah, there's a variety of different ways you can get that. But yeah, and duration of ailments, duration of elemental ailments, or freeze duration, you're going to want some of that. One of the ways you can get that, let's see if I have any or if I already got rid of them. That is for poison. I might have some from when here we go. Okay, so on jewels, you can actually get freeze duration. It can roll from 12 to 16%, and the chance to freeze, once again, does not matter at all. But in this case, I have a 13% increased freeze duration, which is basically like a more multiplier on my damage when it comes to freeze. If you're having a hard time, you can add those to your build. I also really like the medium cluster jewel with Astonishing Affliction, which basically is almost exactly the same as this Elemental Focus notable. It gives 20% increased duration of elemental ailments, increased damage with hits and ailments against enemies affected by ailments, and increased effect of non-damaging ailments. So it's literally exactly basically the same as this, except in order to get the 20% damage, you have to have them already affected by ailments. So it's slightly worse than elemental focus, but after the first attack, it's functionally the same thing. And then I use Storm Rider to generate power charges. So in all of my builds, you'll always see me for Frost Blades running a medium cluster with Astonishing Affliction and Storm Rider. Very important. So there are other sources as well, I should say. Divergent Frost Blades has as its alternate quality up to 20% increased duration of cold ailments. And Anomalous Hatred has up to 10% increased chill and freeze duration. Those are both also going to multiply as well. So just having these two will basically cancel out the downside from Yoke. So now that I've kind of explained how to scale it, oh, I'm sorry, there's a fourth scaler. Because the duration of freeze at the minimum, if you're doing a minimum freeze, is so low, attack speed's actually pretty important too in the case of Frost Blades. Being able to hit again in the duration while they're frozen within that 0.3. If you're doing less than 3, and honestly, if you're following my guide, there's no way you're doing less than 3 attacks per second, even like if you're using a 0.6 claw. If you follow my skill tree and everything, you're still hitting like 4.5, 5 times per second. So this shouldn't be an issue, but just in case you're playing a different skill, you have to be able to hit within that time frame while they're frozen still in order for Heatshiver to proc, or else the freeze will wear off and you won't get the extra fire damage and Trinity won't work. So being able to hit again within that time frame is very important. But it's not, that's a factor in some builds. It's not really a factor if you're following the Frost Blades build. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. But yeah, now we're going to go to the important part, how to figure out how to freeze, or let me make sure, check my OBS, make sure this is visible. All right. So here I have the boss Cirrus, and here is his information, 66.8 million life. And important for us here is his ailment threshold. Almost 6.6 million ailment threshold. That means you would have to do that amount of damage in order to inflict a freeze on him, basically. So how do we figure out whether or not we have that? Well, we would go into our POB here, and if you have, one thing to note, if you have your POB all set up, and custom modifiers, I wanted to show this, you can actually hover over your Sanctified Relic, because POB doesn't detect your Sanctified Relic, and you can press Control-C to copy it, and then go over custom modifiers and press Control V, and it will paste your Sanctified Relic in here. Just to make it clean, I like to get rid of all of the extra stuff, but basically all you need is the stats. So here I have a relic that gives 12% attack speed and 24% increased armor, so I can add that to my POB in order to make it more accurate. But I have my average elusive effect, which is not 110, it's 115, because I have additional elusive effect on my boots. So I have 231 maximum, which makes 215 my average. So I have that set there. And then I have all this set up. So what you do is you go to calculations once you have everything set up like you normally would, and you're going to go to Frost Blades. But before you do that, I almost forgot to do this. Say if you did want to fight Cirrus, you would go down to is the enemy a boss, and you would select Guardian or Pinnacle boss. Okay. Now you would go to calculations, and this isn't going to be accurate right now. So, but for a freeze to apply for the minimum of 0.3 seconds, target must have 30,827. So it looks like we have it all figured out, but this is not actually accurate. See, in order to proc Trinity, you have to freeze without having Trinity active. So what you're going to do is you're going to set your resonance count back down to 0. And then, since you're not hitting with Trinity and you're not hitting with your Heatshiver, you're going to set your shock down lower. I'm just going to go 15. Actually, I'm going to go all the way down to a minimum shock of 10. I have enough ailment where I'm never going to hit a shock of 10, but it's better to err on the side of safety so that you know, so I'm going to put it down really low. All right, so now we can take a look again. And we can see, in my case, I would still hit as high as an ailment threshold of 16,000 or 16 million, 16.1 million. So then I would once again pull up Cirrus, and I would see, okay, I have way more than I need to freeze Cirrus. Now, my character currently is super late game, so that's not too surprising. But um, so if I was having a little difficulty here, like look at my gloves. My gloves have additional strike, basically, is one of the main functions of my gloves. Say I'm having trouble reaching the freeze threshold for Cirrus. Say I'm just a little bit short. Let's say I'm at like 5.5 million or something ailment threshold. Well, Cirrus is all alone. He doesn't have any ads. I don't need that additional strike. What I could do is just pop on a southbound. Let's just go with an average roll because the roll doesn't. I mean, the roll obviously matters because damage is a component. But if I switch this out for southbound, you'll see I can go back into calculations, and now it's gone from 16 million to 25 million ailment threshold. It's increased it by what, like 75% or 70%. So adding on southbound for single target bosses is a good way, instead of your additional strike gloves, is a good way to get enough. Now, if you're unable to get to the proper ailment threshold, the last thing you can do is simply, well, I can't get Trinity to proc, and I can't kind of, manipulate it within the gear set I have and with what I do have, but I still want to do the boss. But I'm pretty close. I'm pretty close to being able to hit that. So what do? Well, you're just going to have to take Trinity out. See, you'll lose a little over 30% of your damage if you do this, but the important thing, if you're close, that's a dead slot anyway. What you can do is you can just take increased critical damage and throw that in the slot anyway. If you're close enough, the increased critical damage will push you over the edge, and that'll allow you to have your Heatshiver proc. So you'll only lose like 32% of your damage instead of 71% damage if you did not gem swap and just tried to do Trinity. Now, obviously, you'd want to use the leveled critical strike damage support with quality if possible. But yeah, that's the basic idea. If you're pretty close to being able to freeze and can't do so, just take Trinity out, replace it. You can also use elemental penetration support, which can only be gotten by selling the replica Bitter Dream. So it's not actually a gem you can buy, but you can buy it from people. And yeah, there are ways to get it. If you're in solo self-found, I guess if you want an elemental penetration gem, you would have to farm heist and get a replica Bitter Dream and then vendor it to get the gem. But yeah, that's basically the whole rundown of how Trinity works, how freeze works, how to check your ailment threshold to know what you need to do in order to get you're over the freeze duration. I just wanted to explain everything because I get asked these questions very frequently. I've explained them in previous guides. I've explained all of this, but I have so many hours of guides that and so many videos on this character that I don't blame people for not, looking through all of them and knowing every bit from all of them. So I just thought this deserved its own video. So yeah, hope that was helpful. Hope there are people who were having trouble with this who will be able to get it fixed. Oh, one more thing, I suppose. This is an outro. Somebody asked me, they said, I have a 900 elemental DPS claw, but I cannot freeze. It's actually detrimental to have too much fire damage because you might throw off the balance with Heatshiver. So if you're freezing, and you have too much fire damage on your claw, it's possible that you'll do a larger proportion of fire damage since you're already getting 130% from Heatshiver, which is being offset by Frost Bomb or Hydrosphere or whatever you want to use for cold exposure, pushing our cold damage up but not our fire damage. So you can actually throw that balance off by having too much. So for claws, I would recommend for prefixes not having fire damage if possible, and if you do, try not to have too high of a roll, I guess. Kind of hard to push, but ideally you would just have tier 1 cold damage roll, like either the crafted or unveiled cold damage or elemental damage with attacks roll, and attacks with this weapon penetrate elemental resistance. Those are the important ones. Physical damage is fine as well because it also will convert 60% of physical into cold from Frost Blades. So yeah, basically you just having a 900 DPS elemental DPS claw is not only not helpful to this build and proccing Heatshiver and Trinity, but can actually be actively detrimental to doing so. So just keep that in mind. This has been Ryan from Behind Eyes Gaming. That's pretty much my last thought, and I will see you next time. Bye.